Hello there everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr, and the PS5 launch title that I'm most looking forward to is Demon's Souls. And kind of Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, despite the fact that I've already played through Devil May Cry 5. Anyways, welcome to this next video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, and today is going to be another Should You Pull video featuring 8 and his banner, his new LD, and the event that comes along with it, as well as the Lufenia mission, or Lufenia mission, however I keep forgetting how to pronounce it. So I'm going to take you guys through some little guides and some little tips and tricks to get you through that Lufenia mission, as well as 8's own kit, and ultimately whether you should pull on his banner. So if that's all stuff that you guys are interested in, then stay tuned and keep on watching. As always guys, don't forget to check out all of my social media links in the description box below, including Twitter, Twitch, Patreon and Discord. On Twitch this week I'm finally getting started on my Final Fantasy count up that I've been promising you guys for weeks. Final Fantasy 1, the PSP version, I will be specific, is all pre-installed, ready to go, so that on Friday night then we're going to get that started, and that's going to be streamed on the same day as 8's Lost Chapter. 8's Lost Chapter I'll be streaming in the morning, and then I'll be streaming again that evening for Final Fantasy's count up. If you'd like to support the channel and myself a little bit further, then perhaps consider becoming a Patreon, or looking at my Patreon link in the description box below, where you can get access to exclusive voice chats with me, so like title cards that are made specific to your needs, and you can get involved in the Would You Pull portion of these videos. And I also shout out one of my patrons every time I release a video specifically, and today that person is going to be Nubstep, who has a wonderful title card below that is a reference to Mogster from Final Fantasy IX, which I think is the most adorable thing ever. So thank you very much for your support. Don't forget to check out all of the links around me in the description box below, and of course don't forget to check out this list that's coming out the bottom here for all the other content creators out there besides myself. So first things first, let's take a look at the banner itself. Now the only new character that actually gets anything new out of this banner is actually 8, so let's take a look at him. Now if you've not used 8 before, 8's primary shtick is that he is an evade and counter based physical damage dealer that kind of masquerades after his LD as a tank, and it's a little bit strange, but we'll go into that when we get to his LD. Now 8 grants himself a fair few different framed buffs, most of which increase his stats. So you get Quick Bolt here, which raises his max bravery's attack and his speed. You also get Last Stand, which raises his max bravery and attack, and it also raises the amount of damage he takes, both bravery and HP, which sounds a little bit odd. And he gives himself basically a better version of his HP attack called Lightspeed Jab, which is basically just a fancy name for HP+. But it also has a particular effect that comes along with his Brave Attack Plus. Now his Brave Attack Plus, if it breaks something, turns his Lightspeed Jab into a plus version of itself, which basically makes it so that it's a completely free turn. So it extends the duration of his buffs by a turn, it has no action delay, doesn't increase turn count, all that kind of thing, and basically it allows him to act again. And it also inflicts defense down on your opponent as well, to make it so that you're dealing that much more damage to begin with. Now his EX beforehand was really strong. Like, Phantom Rush is where you're wanting the meat of where 8 comes from. So Phantom Rush itself is a relatively lackluster attack by itself, in all fairness. It's a 6-hit Brave HP attack with a half-decent Brave Overflow on it, and it also gives him, like, this, but what it does do is give him this buff called Phantom Rush. Now Phantom Rush is maxed out evasion rate, and he counters whenever he evades an enemy attack with an 8-hit Brave HP attack that ignores defense and has a good amount of Brave Overflow on it. Now this is actually pretty scary. However, the problem that 8 always had is that how could you guarantee that the enemy was going to attack him? Because he had no lock, or he had no target lock, or any way of guaranteeing that the enemies were going to target him. Well, his LD actually fixes this. Now his LD is a 8-hit AoE Brave HP attack with split damage, and it also inflicts target lock on enemies for 5 turns once you put all your power stones into it, and it also grants him a second counter attack in Breakfall. Breakfall also gives him what we actually know Last Stand to be, which is preventing his death if he gets hit from at least 50% of his maximum HP, because it puts him to 1 instead. But he does have a 100% counter evasion rate anyway, so he shouldn't really have to worry about it too much. And he also triggers Counter Rush, as well as the Phantom Rush that he gets from his EX. He actually does 2 counter attacks now. And this one is an 8-hit Brave HP attack that ignores defense and actually has splash damage on top of it. And Breakfall also like makes it so that he can have his the buffs from his other stuff for longer. Now, what you also get out of this is a better version of his HP plus, Brave Attack plus, and Light Speed Jab. His HP plus is a 3-hit Brave HP attack with half decent Bravery. His Light Speed Jab regularly is a 2-hit Brave HP attack. But once you've used your Bravery attack and actually broken an enemy, it goes into Light Speed Jab plus plus, where it's a 3-hit Bravery attack, that is followed by an HP attack, and also gets all the free turn stuff out of it. Now, you're not, weirdly, HP plus plus is arguably better in some ways than regular Light Speed Jab, and because 8's skill counts are so low, once you've maxed everything out, you only actually get 6 uses of both of his skills. You're going to want to try and rely on his Brave Attack and HP variants as much as you can. Luckily, his HP or his EX attack has a fast recast rate, so normal recast obviously gets increased with Power Stones, and it does make a big difference. 8 does a lot of damage to enemies that act frequently and target him. A lot. Like, every time they go anywhere near him or look at him funny, then he's going to be dealing 16 hits of Bravery, multiple HP attacks, splash damage on Breakfall. There's a lot of HP damage there to be had when it's not actually your turn to be doing it. So if you're in the right situations and against the right enemies, 8 can be absolutely catastrophic. However, his actual active role, like his skills, don't actually deal all that much damage. So the Bravery hit count on either Quick Bolt Stance or Indomitable Rush actually isn't that high. The reason they're there is to give him the buffs so that he's then ready to deal those counter-attacking damages as much as possible. Now, his C65 does help this in a lot of ways because it extends the buff duration and he gets 3 uses of this, so it is actually really helpful in maintaining his buffs, but keeping on top of maintaining his buffs, including Phantom Rush, including Breakfall, is going to be absolutely paramount to making the most out of 8. Now, you get 4 uses out of Breakfall and Explosive Fist, which is quite nice. Breakfall itself lasts for 6 turns, and then Target Lock only lasts for 5. Now, because he's a Target Lock character, because he wants enemies to be attacking him, he doesn't play very well with other tanks like Warrior of Light or anything like that, because they also want that to happen. And they're more beneficial in different ways to the party by protecting them for using the Target Lock, and 8 is protecting the party in his own way because he's using the Target Lock to evade attacks and counter them and deal a buttload of damage when it's not his turn. But you're gonna have to kind of change your party composition slightly in order to cater, see the pun there, for 8. Because 8 isn't going to protect your party in any other way than taking those hits onto himself and evading them. AoE damage, for example, he'll evade it, his party won't, but the amount of damage that he does do, like through these turns and things like that, he's definitely not one to be underestimated. Now, in terms of artifacts, and I'm actually going to talk about high armor here as well, his artifacts are pretty self-explanatory. He wants damage. Give him attack 108 and his C50 that grants him more attack. That's fairly simple. When it comes to his his armor belongs to the attack category, which makes sense for a character like 8. So he's going to be able to deal that extra damage. And it's actually pretty important for him if you're going to use 8 a lot to be dealing those that extra damage cap. But obviously you need to be able to guarantee that he's able to deal that amount of damage. And as time progresses, although, I mean, 8 is useful in a fair few different Lufenias. Like, he can be used in obviously his own. I've seen solo clears of his own Lufenia with him. Kurasames he can be used in. Gaos he can be using because that's another one that likes counter-attacking. Camlanaut, X-Death, I've even seen him being used in something as late as Ishtola's Heretic Quest, so if you were to pick up 8, he is useful in various different aspects. I'm not sure I would necessarily go in for his high armor unless he was a character you knew you were going to use an awful lot, because while I really like the attack keystone variant of armor, there are other characters that you're going to want to use these on as well, such as Lightning down the line, Cloud down the line. So if you're planning on going for those characters, then you'll probably end up using that attack-based character probably more so than 8. So I wouldn't necessarily go in for 8's high armor unless you really, really wanted it. So now let's take a look at the event itself. What does the Lufenia mission look like when it comes to 8's Lost Chapter? Well, you're going to come up against a pair of Cerberus variants called the Blanc-Clac, or Blanc-Clac, and then like as we can see here from Rem's database on Lufenia here, it's immune to attack down, which is going to be a thing because obviously it's trying to ward you into like evade tanking rather than using another character to do that, but we'll get to Warrior of Light in a second. And the Lufenia Orb here triggers when the Cerberus variant uses triple, which means that they're going to be using 3 attacks in 1 turn. So not only are you going to be wanting to evade attacks as often as possible, you're also going to want to make sure that you keep your bravery up as much as possible in case some of those attacks are AoE. It then cancels the Lufenia Orb if the triple is dispelled, or it cancels it while it's active, sorry, so that it's not having to deal with everything all at once. And your way of countering the orb is to do a counter attack. So characters like 8 or Kater or Galoof, they're all going to work in ways to counter the orb. One thing to bear in mind with Galoof in particular is that not all of the attacks that the Cerberuses do are physical, so he's not guaranteed to evade those, but he is still very good for this particular mission. Now, the ability itself removes their debuffs, does like a bravery HP attack to everybody, and it also gives them a framed buff that boosts their initial bravery and their speed. So it's not ideal to let this go off. However, if you're using Warrior of Light or Barsh, you can actually just tank this. Like, it's not the end of the world if it does go off. Like, you can use Warrior of Light as an alternative to 8, Kater, Galoof, etc. You can actually use Edge as well, as long as you're really, really careful as to where you use his EX, so you get the 100% party evasion buff. You can actually use that as well. Now, in terms of who you want to take along for this, I would suggest at least taking somebody that is either going to deal with the orb. So if you've got 8, you're obviously going to use him. If not, then I've given some suggestions as to other characters you're going to use, or a way of tanking the attack altogether. Wall and Barsh can do this, and Edge can do this if you really need him to. And then you're going to want a high-level damage dealer, although honestly I would suggest against Noctis, because the problem that Noctis has, and the reason that he's not the be-all and end-all of all Lufenia missions, is that in this particular fight, you actively want the enemy to attack you if you're using a counter-attack of some description. If you're using, say, Warrior of Light to try and tank it, then it's not such a big deal. But if you want to like use counterattacks to actually counter the orb, you need the enemy to actually attack you. So having infinite turns is just going to make the Lufenia orb go off and not make it so that they're actually going to be able to attack you for you to counterattack them and make the orb go back up. So that's going to make it that's a reason to not necessarily use Noctis in absolutely everything. My plan, I'd quite like to experiment with just trap-based characters, because I'd like to use Kater just to prove that she can do this, alongside Emperor and Maria, because I think it'd be hilarious just to allow the enemy to attack me, but have about 6 billion traps go off every time one of their turns go off, and it would be nice to make use of Emperor's LD while I still have it and it's relevant. VV I think would be great as a damage dealer as well, as long as you can keep the health up to counter it, to counter the amount of damage that he's burning off. There's actually quite a lot of different characters that you can use here. As a matter of fact, if we take a look at Tombury troops, where site here as well, obviously all the characters they've suggested here are all characters that are related to actually countering the orb or countering the Lufenia attack. If you have a Mid-Italian's going to do well as well, particularly as a friend unit, because you're going to be able to make it so that they don't get a turn when they've not got the Lufenia orb on, because as soon as that orb goes off, you go in. You go in as hard as you can. They do gain the orb after certain HP thresholds, but as long as you keep on top of that, it's actually not that bad. This is early Lufenia. So this is the point in time where the Lufenia attacks aren't instant death. You can get around them in certain ways. But don't rest on your laurels, because this doesn't last forever. So now we come to the big question, should you pull on 8 during his Lost Chapter? I think this is a completely taste-dependent banner. From this point onwards, should you pull is almost a bit of a poor statement to make at the moment, because honestly the answer is yes, you should pull on everybody, because everybody's amazing. But I'm going to maintain the title of the video because it's what everybody's used to. With 8 in particular, I think if you love using characters that love to do solos and duos and things like that in various content, so like soloing DEs, or you get a bit of a kick out of using like 8 to solo his own Lufenia, or I think I've seen like clears of like 8 and Keita as a duo taking on Kurosame's Lufenia as well. So there are people who love using solo and duo characters to clear various content are gonna want 8, like, because he does that to a massive extent and it helps. It's the sort of thing that the players like that will love. He's also not announced to come back anytime soon. As far as we know, his LD hasn't come back for, well, like up until this point in JP, except I believe in one of the banners that may or may not come back for us. Because of it was during one of the banners that JP had to counter the COVID or the first lockdown or anything like that. So if you want him, then now's your time to get him, because you might not get another chance for a very long time. If you want to take advantage of like various situations where 8 excels, and I've already listed like a good 5 different Lufenia missions in which he's useful, then he is really strong in those Lufenias, and he is really good for multiple different places. Like when Boss Rush and Transcendence come out, there are going to be places where you may want to plop him into that, but he is a great character. He isn't, however, useful all the time. As time progresses, Lufenia bosses like using attacks that can't be evaded, and that is an issue when 8's entire mechanic revolves around evading attacks. So as they become more common, 8's going to fall to the wayside more and more, so bear that in mind if you're going to go in for 8. He's great at the places that he's useful in, and the places where he's not useful, he's completely dead weight. However, if you want, like, and I will say that because he's kind of a tank and kind of not, he doesn't play well with other tanks. So if you're using Warrior of Light or Barsh a lot, or Gladio when he comes around, you're not really going to use 8 very often alongside those characters, because he kind of takes their thunder and twists it in a more offensive capacity, where he's not tanking attacks for the sake of protecting the party, he's tanking the attacks in order to deal damage. And he does rely on his counterattacks to deal damage quite heavily, because his skill counts and his like hit counts actually aren't that high if he's not countering. If he is countering, his hit count goes through the roof. But if he's not, it's a lot less appealing to a lot of players. So if you like to use characters like Warrior of Light, Barsh and Gladio a lot, then you do have to kind of consider how you're going to change your party composition to cater for 8. And also, I mean, a lot of us have hurt for resources recently. A lot of people have said that they've like had to pity Warrior of Light or Vivi. If you're hurting for resources and there are characters in the future that you know you want, like Kurosame, Kuja, Gladio, or Lightning, then possibly pulling on 8 may not be the best choice for you, because those characters, particularly Gladio and Lightning, are going to be characters that you use a lot in the future. So while 8 is really useful in a fair few Lufenias, if it means having to sacrifice your pulls on other characters, then maybe think twice about it. Luckily, Kuja comes with a summon board, so at least we're going to get a load of resources out of that. So now it's time for Would You Pull, the section of the video where you, the viewer, can tell me and everybody else exactly how you feel about a banner and whether you would or would not pull on it for any particular reason. Now with 8's Lost Chapter, of the people that I've asked for their votes on this particular matter, it seems like more people would say no than yes, but if you put everyone together that says yes, then it kind of evens out. 47% of the people who I asked said no, they were not going to pull on this banner at all. 39% of people said yes, they were going to use tickets on this banner, and 13% said that yes, they were going to use gems on this banner. So Lars DFFOO says that that 8 is a favourite for him, so he's definitely going to be using gems. But besides that, he's one of the best evade attackers we have thus far. He is selfish, but don't forget he can solo his own Lufenia with his full kit. I'd recommend to pull here that if you look out for a fancy evade damage dealer that can solo Chaoses even with only his EX+. It's funny that what's funny with 8 is that he deals twice as much damage with his right punch than his left, because that is the fact that he is actually right-handed in the game that he comes from. So that's a nice little extra bit of trivia for anyone who wants to know anything about 8 that perhaps they didn't know before. And I think that 8 is going to be great for people who love him. Like, people who love 8, they're going to get used out of him, and it's great. Although I think that because we're having so many great characters coming out, there are going to be some that get used more than others. Everything's coming out Millhouse says, having already purpled 8 in the past in anticipation of his LD, I'm neither putting gems nor tickets into this banner. Pulled for Warrior of Light cost me too much, and my time on JP has me feeling that 8 just isn't going to last very long. I could pull for him, but Gladio has a more useful, albeit more limited, counter game overall, and 8 doesn't really bring much outside of slightly better than average damage. He can trivialise a couple of fights, but I can manage without. If I'm lucky with Kurosame, maybe I'll go back with some tickets. This is exactly how I'm probably going to go when it goes to 8. I don't have his EX, I don't have anything for him. Therefore, if I were to get lucky and get one of his rarer bits in a free pull, because it's the last free pull that we're going to get, I would consider using tickets. But honestly, Kurosame is very much a priority for me over 8, and given that I want him, I want Kuja, I want Gladio, I want Lightning, there's a gauntlet of banners coming up, all with stuff that I want in them. So therefore, I just think that 8 may just slip to the wayside for me personally. Gabe Turner says, I'm pretty torn. I'll likely throw some tickets at the banner to see if his LD drops, but my roster has enough physical DPS as is. 8's evade counter mechanic is way better with Lock, but I'm not sure about his longevity as a DPS. Further, I'll be pulling for Gal's LD, who is also another counter-based character, and I have Galoof complete. He evades and counters only physical, but it's sort of the same. Granted, I could use 8 to free up some characters from DE, but there are too many favourites or meta characters coming to spend resources on. And that's very much the same kind of thing. Like, I mean, there are people in very much the same position as me who are wanting to save for other characters, and if you are planning on pulling for Gal and his LD, he is another counter-based character. So you don't necessarily need to put all of your eggs in that basket if you don't need to. Straight Trippin says, I'm starting to run pretty dry on resources and I need to save up where I can. VV and Wall made me take a hit in tickets and gems, so this one's going to be a pass for me. Now, this obviously goes back to what I was saying about depending entirely on what your situation is with gems and tickets. My personal opinion is that 8 is a great character to have. Like, he's a great character to have. But personally, for me at least, he is what I would consider a bonus extra. If I were to get his stuff easily, I would use him, but I'm not going to go all in on him. Nubstep finally says, I voted for yes on using tickets. I have 8's whole kit, so I'm just going for the LD. I've missed out on Galoof and Faris, so my counterattack characters are limited as of now. So if you're not going for Gal, then 8 is probably the best option you're going to have for an evade and counter damage dealer. Just keep in mind all the different things that you need to do when it comes to creating a party composition that involves a character like 8 and doesn't involve an actual tank. So that's going to be all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to all of my patrons who voted and left their comments on the Would You Pull section of this video. Now that that's out, let me know in the comments below whether you plan on pulling for 8 or whether you actually want King or Quistis and their EXs, because I didn't really touch on them. And Quistis is actually still a pretty solid character, certainly for the Lufenia mission herself. I've seen loads and loads of clears that use Quistis as well. Don't forget to like the video, share it out to anyone who plays Dissidia, Final Fantasy, Opera Omnia, and click that bell for notifications on any future videos that I might be making. And don't forget to stay tuned for Friday night and Friday daytime, where I'll be streaming twice in one day to stream 8's Lost Chapter and then get started on the Great Final Fantasy Count-Up. Thank you all again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.